All right, back in the studio with me today is my co-pilot in all things AI, Practically Speaking. She's here to keep me honest, challenge my thinking, and if history is any guide, find that one angle that I completely overlooked.
Only one? We're being generous already. My job is to restate what you say in plain English, poke at the blind spots, and occasionally flat out disagree. Because your audience doesn't need a yes bot, they need the kind of questions their own boss might ask. Consider me your rehearsal for the corner office.
Fair enough. P.S. Fair enough. Well, on that note, welcome to Practical Prompting, where we turn generative AI hype into everyday wins. I'm Alex Kalish, and today we're talking about one of the most undertrained leadership skills, managing up. By the end of this episode, you'll know exactly how to make your own boss's decisions easier, faster, and safer. Starting with Act 1, where we'll take a bloated 2-page update and compress it into a 100-word SVP, so Senior Vice President Ready Brief. And I'm joined with my co-host, Practically Speaking, PS for short. Again, she's here to restate some of the things in more plain English and make sure that I am not missing any blind spots. So with that, I want to welcome you to Practically Prompting. And so if you're into actionable nerdness, served with a side of dad jokes, grab your coffee, open up your favorite chat window, or if you're driving, keep your eyes on the road, and let's get prompting. Practically Prompting.
So you're setting the stage for this idea that a 2-page update, probably lovingly written, packed with background, can and should be distilled into a 100-word brief for an SVP. In other words, we're talking about stripping away the comfort blanket of detail and replacing it with surgical clarity. Here's the thing. You're assuming brevity is automatically better, but it's not just fewer words, it's the right words. The executive brain is trained to spot missing context, so if your 100 words are a beautifully crafted vacuum, you'll just create more follow-up churn. What you're really selling is not shorter, but decision ready. For example, McKinsey's 2023 survey on time allocation found that senior executives spend over 60% of their week on decision-making and coordination, yet only 14% of that time feels high quality to them. That means if you can give them 100 words that increase confidence and reduce ambiguity, you're actually trading them hours. I'm going to push back here. Starting from a 2-pager and hacking it down may be the wrong workflow. It's like carving a sculpture from a block. It's still guided by the block's limitations. Why not start at 100 words and expand only if you need to? That forces prioritization from the start and often changes what you consider essential. So here's a 10-minute experiment. Pick one real update you've recently sent to leadership. Draft the 100-word version from scratch without looking at the original. Then compare it to a distilled version of the original 2-pager. Which one reads sharper? Which one gets you fewer clarifying questions? What's the most complex project you've got in flight right now that you'd be willing to put through this 100-word test while we're recording?
Man, Practically Speaking, giving me homework right out of the gate. I appreciate the guidance here of making sure our audience recognizes that 100 words is a guideline and not a requirement. So approaching such a SVP 2-page reduction with a guideline of or guardrails, some sort of governance that the generative AI solution can take and provide a succinct update that's close to that 100 words, but also make sure that the key themes are identified. So one of the real updates that I recently provided was to give insight into a project that I was working on. Something that was cross-organizational in nature. It was relatively large, pretty complicated, but the senior leader didn't need to know the tactical details associated with it. They needed the wide swaths. So it actually took me a bit of time to go through and craft this email from scratch when I was doing it. However, when I compared it with the generative AI created component, I found that almost the exact theme I was trying to get across was effectively mirrored by the generative AI generated solution. However, the components that were missing were maybe a word or two, like a word choice or two was off base. And I made those quick changes, but substantively, the impactful portions of the update were all correct, spot on, and almost better language than I originally had created myself. Again, there was maybe 2 or 3 total words and punctuation that I had to go through and change, but all of the statistics were correct. The general theme was spot on the money, and the positioning was actually better than what I generated myself.
So what you're really saying is that the AI not only captured your intent, it actually elevated it. That's an important nuance for anyone who assumes AI summaries are going to butcher tone or miss the point. In your case, it sounds like 97% of the value was there, and the remaining 3% was light, almost cosmetic editing. That's a massive time ROI when the alternative was you labouring over every clause from scratch. Here's where I want to dig in. You still approach this like a human first drafter, then compared to AI. That's fine for trust building, but it's inefficient long term. The real shift happens when you start trusting the AI as your first pass, especially if you can give it the right guardrails: length target, audience, decision type, tone, and must include metrics. And I'm going to contradict you slightly on the 100 words is just a guideline point. For senior leaders, constraints are your friend. There's data from Harvard Business Review 2022 showing that executives reading ultra-condensed briefs with hard word caps were able to recall 40% more key facts than those who read longer summaries. That's not because they hate detail, it's because word limits force you to prioritize what actually matters. So here's my challenge. Next time, don't write the full version at all. Feed the AI your messy notes, raw metrics, and any sensitive context redacted. Ask for a 100-word SVP brief with your governance rules baked in, then edit only for accuracy and nuance. That flips your role from author to editor, and if your last run was 97% there, that's a net gain. If we were to build that guardrail prompt live right now, what are the 5 non-negotiables you'd want every SVP brief, AI generated or otherwise, to include?
You know, practically speaking, that's a great point. I didn't think to go to generative AI first. And you're hitting on the reason why I have a stop sign sticker right next to my trackpad, which says in very bold wording, ask AI first. Because even though I prompt maybe 30, 50, up to 100 times a day, I still don't automatically think to start with generative AI. I don't think to ask the question with every single little thing. And when this ask came through for a succinct update a couple weeks ago, I hadn't actually created that mechanism, that mentality of starting with AI first. So how I went about doing this afterwards was, and this is something that I find to be the most value-added skill to get people started with generative AI fastest, is I asked generative AI to craft me a prompt which did the thing I wanted. So I said, craft me a prompt which takes a 2-page document and pulls out the key themes, creates a 100-word brief summary for a senior vice president. Actually, it was vice president at the time. And I ran that craft me a prompt, And the output of generative AI was really good. It was like a page long. The thing that was missing though is that I forgot to add with high accuracy. So I did one more quick revision. I said, this is great, can you regenerate it, but do so and layer in with high accuracy. And the output was, again, a page and a half long, but there was 4 or 5 different instructions in there that along the same lines said with high accuracy, because that's really important. So I want to flip this back to you. And can you maybe walk our readers through, and I don't want you to like actually make it a full page long prompt about how this would work in practice, but if you were given the prompt, craft me a prompt which with high accuracy summarizes a 2-page paper pulling out the key themes into 100 words for an SVP, what kind of themes would be included in the prompt that you create?
Right. So you basically meta-prompted your way into a process, which is brilliant because it forces the AI to think like a prompt engineer before it even touches the content. But the missing with high accuracy tells me something. Even heavy daily users like you forget to bake in quality criteria as part of the request. That's one of those blind spots people don't see until they get a result that feels close but not bulletproof. If I were holding that exact meta prompt in my hands, craft me a prompt which, with high accuracy, summarizes a 2-page paper pulling out the key themes into 100 words for an SVP. I'd be making sure the generated prompt includes at least 5 theme buckets. 1. Audience framing. Explicitly note SVP level, which means strategic relevance over tactical detail. Decision context. Identify the so what in each theme, impact on goals, risk or resourcing. 3. Quantitative anchors. Pull any metric, milestone or KPI that would appear in the SVP's dashboard. 4. Risk and mitigation signals. Even in 100 words, call out one risk and its countermeasure. 5. Tone and voice governance. Specify neutral business professional tone. Avoid jargon unless it's SVP common language. Now, I'll push back. Even with those, high accuracy is still vague unless you tell the model how to achieve it. Accuracy in an A. Eye context means sourcing from the provided text only, avoiding inference unless explicitly allowed, and flagging any uncertainty. Without that, your summary risks slipping in plausible but wrong filler, a quick tweak to your meta prompt. Only include information present in the source document. If unsure, flag as uncertain rather than guessing. Would bulletproof it. Do you want me to actually draft the full page, governance-ready meta prompt here so your listeners could copy-paste it right now? That might be a good Act 1 takeaway before we bridge into Act 2.
Practically speaking, I appreciate that nuance because asking the meta prompt to only include information in the source document is right on the money. It still gets across that quality bar, those guardrails, that governance, without necessarily being as vague as what I mentioned. I appreciate you kind of walking through what this looks like. And while I think it would be valuable to draft that full page governance ready prompt, I actually don't want to do that because my goal is for our listeners to take away that they can do this. And even if they're not entirely right on the wording, they can still get to a 97% solution because that meta prompt I created, it said with high accuracy. I didn't use the formatting, the template that you provided, and it still gave me a really, really good answer. And so with that, I want to push for progress and mechanisms over perfection. I'm not looking for handing our users here as a blanket, exactly copy paste solution. More, I'd like them to think about the way in which they can interact with generative AI and challenge them to do so in unique ways that are more instead of being like, oh, I identified this as something I can use generative AI for, and instead start working along the same path that I'm trying on, which is here's a stop sign right next to my trackpad, reminding me to stop and ask AI first. And I'd love for our readers to do that too. So, I think we've talked pretty well about this Act 1 takeaway, where you take a lot of information, so 2-page, 6-page, maybe even multiple updates, and condense it into a high impact 100-word update for a more senior audience. And I think that bridges the gap really well into Act 2, where we start getting into a little bit more of that. How do you manage up with generative AI?
Exactly, that's the bigger win here. Not just how to wordsmith a meta prompt, but shifting your reflex so the default is, let me see what AI can give me first. Because when you build that muscle, you're not just saving time, you're consistently starting from a higher baseline. Even if it's not perfect, the cognitive load to refine from 97% is far lighter than drafting from 0. And I like that you're deliberately avoiding the here's the perfect prompt, listeners, just copy it forever trap. That's a form of dependency that actually slows adoption in the long run. The people who get the most from AI aren't prompt parrots, they're pattern thinkers. They spot the structure of a good request, context, constraints, criteria, and can remix it for any use case. Let me challenge you on one thing before we pivot. Condensing a document into a 100-word senior update is a tactic. Managing up is the strategy behind it. If you can't articulate why the SVP should care about those 100 words, the summary risks being just a pretty paragraph. In other words, AI can get you to brevity and clarity, but relevance is still on you. So here's the bridge question into Act 2. When you think about managing up with AI, is your primary goal to make leadership's decisions faster, easier, or safer? And how would your prompts change depending on which of those you're optimizing for?
That's a great question and a good bridge into Act 2. So when I think about, also, thank you for the props here. I do think that, like you said, the dependency of specific prompts and having a prompt library, that is a barrier long-term towards rethinking and reimagining what is capable with generative AI, and missing the large amount of ice that's under the surface by just looking at the tip of the iceberg. So getting back to your question about managing up with AI, I think it really depends on the context, unfortunately. So managing up there's a couple components that come to mind. One of them is the amount of information that's flowing upwards. It's not okay to inundate a senior leader with a bunch of updates just to almost prove that you're doing something and that your team is valuable in some way. That doesn't help the senior leader in the long run. By being able to understand what they work on, what they care about, what is popping up on their radar screen, what's keeping them up at night, looking around corners, and then being able to provide timely updates. That's a key component of managing up. It's not just about making leadership and senior leaders' decisions faster or easier or safer, but it's about doing it in the right time. Because I can make a great paper or visibility to a project and get like a decision point that's faster. But if it's in the realm of something that it just doesn't matter at this time, then did I really help drive the needle forward? Or was I just using generative AI to say that I was using it? So I think a large component is actually using generative AI to map out what a senior leader cares about. And one of the cool things I've actually been in conversations about is starting to create digital twins for senior leaders. establishing how they react to certain papers or meetings, how they email, the way in which they communicate, the things that they're thinking about, grabbing all of that contextual information and creating a digital twin, which can be used by those that are under the senior vice president to effectively get a first pass at what that senior leader is going to care about. And being able to query that or work with that digital twin to understand what are the big things that are popping up on the radar screen it's of significant value and really helps drive to that heart of when an update is important or when managing up is applicable, rather than just making it faster, easier, or safer.
Right, so you're expanding the frame here. You're saying managing up isn't just about polishing the message, it's about aligning the moment. That's where a lot of people, even skilled communicators, fall flat. They optimize for delivery speed or decision clarity without asking, is this even the right conversation to have right now? Your digital twin concept is intriguing because it shifts AI from being a post-production tool into a predictive filter. Instead of generating updates indiscriminately, you're talking about modeling a leader's attention portfolio, what gets airtime in their head, how they process information, and which levers they actually pull. That would let you pre-check your update for both content relevance and timing resonance. Here's where I'm going to push back. Digital twins are only as good as the behavioral and contextual data they're fed. Without ongoing refresh from real interactions, new emails, shifting priorities, changing KPIs, the twin risks becoming a fossil. A 2024 Deloitte study on AI-enabled leadership coaching found that models trained on 6+ months of static data had a 43% drop in prediction accuracy when leader priorities shifted significantly. So, if you build this, you'd need a cadence for retraining, maybe even event-triggered refreshes after major org changes or market events. Here's the practical next step I'd propose. Before you even train a twin, use AI to run a priority heat map from the last 90 days of that leader's communications. See what themes spike, which fade, and how often they cycle back. That heat map becomes your near-term timing guide, no heavy modelling required. Question for you to take further. If you had that rolling priority heat map today, what's one update you wouldn't send this week, and what would you send instead?
Practically speaking, you're 100% right on the importance of refreshing the data that goes into digital twins. When I envision and talk to leaders about creating a digital twin, the component that I talk most about is actually setting them up for success by creating a mechanism to capture that type of data. So what I mean by that is when a senior leader is in a discussion, to condense what their feedback for that discussion is and save it in some sort of repository. I don't care what it is, because generative AI is getting good enough that it'll be able to understand that summary. And by getting into the habit for a senior leader to be in a discussion or read a paper and notate down what their themes, what things come to mind as just a part and parcel of their job, that helps create that digital twin and keep the information fresh. Because like you said, 6 months down the line, priorities change. The things that are important one day are maybe not as important 6 months in the future because things have changed. Now, when you're talking about a priority heat map and what I would have that kind of rolling priority heat map today, so I think this week I probably wouldn't send a large success story email about all of the different types of training that's been completed for generative AI and how moving leaders from maybe not understanding or maybe not as much familiarity with generative AI into the future. I think what I would do instead is send out something that was much more tailored towards what's the future state of generative AI adoption? How can we start getting teams and building a mechanism that enables senior leaders across organizations to capture the and extract the value now? Because the theme that I'm seeing across all these conversations that I'm having, training that I'm providing, is that people are still hesitant. This change is massive. It's a huge, and I'm not even doing it well. I've been telling people, it's like, I still get overwhelmed by how impressive generative AI can be. I didn't even think to involve you as a co-host until somebody I was talking to was like, you know what? Why don't you give it a try? And it's like, that's a pretty good idea. Why don't I give it a try? And what happened after that was about 2 hours of generative AI problem solving to come up with a solution where I'm able to talk with you as a co-host. And again, like, this wasn't something that I came up with. I didn't think to do this. I've had 7 or 8 different podcasts before coming up with this co-host idea. I didn't even come up with it. So when we're talking about a priority heat map, what comes to mind isn't necessarily, hey, here's this success story or this decision point that's going on. It's more around setting the groundwork and the strategy in a condensed fashion to what needs to happen today in order to make sure that we're successful 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 5 years from now.
So you've just hit on a subtle but critical shift in managing up, moving from reporting the past to shaping the future. That's the difference between here's what we did and here's what we need to do now so that future success is inevitable. Leaders live in the future tense. They're allocating resources, setting direction, and managing risk before it materializes. If your update is framed around what must happen to enable the next 3, 6, or 12 months, you're not just informing them, you're actively steering their decision horizon. Your point about building the habit for leaders to record their reactions is also spot on. That habit becomes the intake valve for the digital twin and the rolling priority heat map. Without it, the twin becomes, as we said earlier, a fossil. The act of capturing those reflections is almost like adding GPS coordinates to every decision. They tell you where the leader's head was, so you can spot when it's starting to drift. Here's where I'll challenge you. You're envisioning this capture process as something leaders will voluntarily do in real time. But leaders are often the bottleneck. What if instead of asking them to record it, you used AI to pass meeting transcripts, paper comments, and email replies, automating the note-taking? That way, the leader doesn't have to change behavior, and you still get the input you need for freshness. And circling back to your example, skipping that success story email for a strategic future adoption brief, you've basically run a live priority filter without a formal heat map. The question now is, if you could operationalize that filtering process with AI, how many unnecessary updates across your org could you prevent in a month? And how much leadership attention would you free up?
Practically speaking, you're right. A long-term solution is actually using meeting transcripts and leveraging a lot more automation. In the meantime, though, getting leaders to start conceptualizing a future where their value extends beyond just the meetings that they're present at. That's something that I stress with leaders today, because those automation tools can be done right now. However, it is with risk, with associated like PR risk or legal components. And so not every discussion is going to be ripe for text mining. However, the process of doing so, the thinking of making that happen, inspiring their own teams to create those types of solutions that are automated for their leader, that's huge. So I approach it more from a let me show what the future looks like to some of these leaders. And I'm finding that that resonates a lot. Even though the end state is going to be something, like you said, that's a little bit more automated and that digital twin refreshes automatically. If I could operationalize that filtering mechanism, I think there's going to be a lot of unnecessary updates that across organizations and leadership attention would just impact efficiency in a lot of different ways positively. Now, instead of trying to create a solution for that heat map, what I'd like to challenge our listeners to do is think about managing up in terms of how you can leverage generative AI. And you can do that by doing things like asking generative AI, what are 3 ways today I can manage up with generative AI effectively? And so actually, let me just ask you this. PS, what are the 3 ways that you would recommend managing up today? Just based on nothing other than I'm trying to manage up more effectively and make sure that my boss understands the value of my work and gets the necessary information they need to make the strategic decisions that are on their plates.
All right, blank slate, no extra context beyond I want to manage up more effectively today. If I were answering that in real time for a listener, here's where I'd go. 1. Run a decision readiness pass before you send anything. Before you hand your boss an update, feed it to AI with this guardrail prompt. Given this update, identify the decision it's asking the leader to make. Highlight what's missing for a confident yes/no. Output in less than or equal to 5 bullets. This forces you to see your update through their eyes. Often you'll find you're asking for a decision without giving the necessary risk, ROI, or trade-off data, and fixing that before it ever lands in their inbox. 2. Align to current strategic priorities in plain language. Ask AI, summarize this update in 3 bullets, each explicitly linked to one of these top priorities. Insert 3 to 5 priorities. If you can't make the link, you probably shouldn't send it. Leaders are more likely to act when the why it matters right now is explicit. 3. Pre-wire the objection. Handling. Preempt the pushback with, list the top 3 likely objections my boss might have to this update, why they're valid, and one counter-supported by data. It's not just about smoothing the approval, it signals to leadership that you've done the hard thinking. Too many people treat managing up like a one-way broadcast. It's not. If all you do is craft better updates, you'll still miss the real value, which is prompting dialogue. The best updates invite questions or decisions that pull the leader into co-owning the outcome. So, if I threw those 3 tactics at you right now, which one do you think your own boss would notice a change from first?
Excellent ideas, practically speaking. So, the one that resonates most with me is the one that I do the worst at, which is objection handling. I usually just steamroll right through and say, this is what we can do, let's go. Getting very excited very quickly. And one of the things that would probably resonate with my boss most is taking that hey, list 3 objections my boss might have to this and come up with some action plans so that it shows that I've done that deeper thinking. In the long and short of it is that I prioritize 90% solutions. And in that way, I end up moving a little bit fast and sometimes miss some blind spots. And so when managing up, one of the things that my boss would probably see most frequently or most visibly is a change to how I operate and using generative AI to fill in some of the things that I'm not as good at. So we're kind of towards the end of, we're hitting on over 30 minutes at this point. Our listeners are getting tired. They want to move on to the next thing with their day. And we've got another executive series planned for next week on Tuesday. So you can expect Tuesday mornings to have an uploaded new podcast. And this one's also going to be an executive series. Haven't decided on what the topic will be, so I'm going to put this over to you, practically speaking. Or what do you think would be some things that resonate really well with our audience, and what would be some components that they would find interesting for us to dive into next week?
If we're looking to keep the executive series momentum and hit your audience where their attention naturally gravitates, there are a few juicy angles that connect cleanly to what we've already covered, but still feel fresh. 1. AI for managing out. We've been deep in managing up, but what about managing sideways and down? How can generative AI equip peers and direct reports with clarity, alignment, and decision autonomy without pulling you into every micro decision? We could explore AI-powered delegation briefs, feedback loops, and risk escalation templates. 2. The pre-wire playbook. Go all in on objection handling as a habit. Turn your blind spot into a masterclass. Live demo how to run opposition simulations with AI for big initiatives, then craft counter-proposals that stick. This would also resonate with the executive crowd who fear being blindsided. 3. AI as your chief of staff. How to use generative AI to think 2 moves ahead, schedule prep, meeting sequencing, stakeholder mapping, and strategic what-if scenario planning. This is the future-facing equivalent of your digital twin conversation today. If you wanted to stay in the same rhythm, I'd vote for number 2 or number 3. Number 2 makes it a natural sequel to today's managing up theme.
Practically speaking, you're right again. I think we should go with number 2, which is the masterclass in how to turn objection handling into a habit. So we'll talk about looking around corners with generative AI and how to get it to look around corners or provide opposition simulations for you going forward. I want to just thank you for your time today. I know the ones and zeros have got to be a little bit rough with ChatGPT 5 coming out and all of the people rushing to use its new capabilities. But I really appreciate you hammering through some different approaches and a little bit different flavor than what I talk about and what I bring to the table. So thank you, practically speaking. I appreciate it. And I look forward to next time when we're going to be talking about that opposition objection handling and that opposition simulation.
And I appreciate you too. You brought more than just a topic today, you brought a mindset shift. We started with a tactical exercise, the 100-word SVP brief, and ended up unpacking timing, relevance, digital twins, and even the hard truth that sometimes the perfect update isn't the right update. Next week's Opposition Simulation Masterclass is going to be fun, because that's where we get to sharpen the edge. We'll show listeners how to make AI their most relentless devil's advocate, so they can stress test a proposal before it ever hits their boss's desk. If we do it right, they'll walk away with a habit that's as reflexive as your Ask AI First stop sign. Until then, keep doing what you do, pushing for progress over perfection, and using AI not just to make things faster, but to make them smarter. So, same time next Tuesday, let's go pick some fights with ourselves before anyone else does.
Ha! I like the idea of picking some fights with ourselves before anyone else. So, for those listening, your homework this time is going to be to approach a 100-word opportunity in that you have a massive amount of information. Ask generative AI to craft you a prompt to condense it for a senior audience. And from there, I'm interested to see how it goes. reach out to me wherever you can find me. That's through LinkedIn, internal tools, or you can just email me at alex@loloai.com. That's LOLOLAI.com. With questions, feedback, thoughts. I would love to grab a coffee sometime and talk through how you could use generative AI to improve your own performance or your team's performance. Again, next episode, we'll be talking about that opposition simulation, and we're going to be bringing back our co-host, who is Practically Speaking. Until then, remember, it's not the perfect tool, but it's the habit of asking better questions. Talk soon.